My name's Dana Harris Seeger. I am a painter and a printmaker, and today I am going to talk about Intaglio printmaking here at BARN. So printmaking as an art medium is an indirect method of making an art piece, meaning that we don't take paint or ink and apply it directly to the paper. What we do instead is we use a matrix that we make an image on. In this case, this is a copper plate. And then we put ink into that plate and print it using a press, like the one behind me, to make an image. So it's an indirect method of making art. And printmaking as a genre encompasses a myriad of different types of materials and methods, one of which is intaglio. And if you have ever done potato stamping or rubber stamping, that is a relief method of printmaking, and it's completely different. Screen printing is another method, lithography, the list goes on. But today we're going to talk about the medium of intaglio printmaking, which also incorporates a lot of different types of media, which I have some examples of here. What intaglio means is to incise. So the Italian word intaglio, I-N-T-A-G-L-I-O, pronounced intaglio, means to incise. So what that means for us is that on our plate or our plexiglass, our metal, even a solar plate with some photo emulsion embedded in the surface, that means that the image is actually incised or bitten into the surface. So unlike a potato stamp where the image is on the top, you roll ink on it and then print from that, the image is actually in grooves. So we're making little grooves, whether that's by scratching into the plate with a metal stylus or using acid to kind of bite the surface, or a photo emulsion to create the intaglio. Incising, that's how it's created. You can also use, I brought a plexiglass plate that has been etched using a laser. So that is also a way that you can create the bitten in part of the plate. It kind of originated with the metal art, so metal smithing, decorating armor in the 1500s. And then an artist named Daniel Hopfner, I think he was English, but he kind of had the first idea of putting ink into the plate and then making a print from that. So that was, I guess, around the 1500s is when that originated. And artists have taken that medium and explored all kinds of different ways of incising into a plate, putting ink into those grooves and pulling an image from that. This is an example of a plexiglass Drypoint print. And what we mean by Drypoint is that no ground is used. We just scratch directly into the plate. And I'm going to demonstrate that method for you now. So I have a plate here. This is just a very thin, like 1/16 of an inch thin piece of acrylic. And I have a steel needle. So the needle is like pretty sharp. You can get these from the art supply store or even the clay supply store because you can scratch into the clay. So either one works. And then you can just start scratching into the surface. You can also do this with a copper or a zinc metal plate. It's a little bit harder because you have to actually scrape through the metal. But what happens is it leaves a really nice sort of burr or hazy part of the line. So Drypoint as an intaglio method is pretty easily recognizable when it's printed because of that sort of fuzziness of the line. Artists like Edward Hopper used that method a lot. So if you look at his etchings or his intaglio prints, you'll notice that a lot of them say Drypoint. One of the cool things about using plexiglass, though, as opposed to copper, is that you can see through it. So I can use an under image to actually use as a reference to do my scratching, and I can place that plexiglass or acrylic plate over my image that I want to create, and then I can just start scratching the lines into the surface. And like a lot of printmaking methods, this method is also a mirror image. So when you look at the way that the print looks on the paper, it's actually a mirror image on the plate. So when you go to make your image, you have to kind of think about it in reverse. And because the acrylic is clear, when I put something black behind it, it makes it a lot easier to see. So now I'm just freehanding. And the harder I push, of course, the squeakier it gets, but also the deeper the line. And I can reapply my stylus to make a thicker line. I can also use cross hatching if I wanted to emphasize like a darker tone. I can go one direction and then I can cross like a pen and ink almost. So one very obvious difference about intaglio printmaking versus something like block printing or relief printing is that you can see that this is very linear and this is very graphic. So there's more shapes to the block print versus, and screen printing too. And intaglio, because it's incising a line, you have a lot more of a linear look. So I can just continue to make imagery. I can use sandpaper even to make texture. In fact, this print here has sandpaper in the background to give it more of a tone. If I wanted like an overall kind of grayish tone or a darker tone, I can use different grits of sandpaper. And because that roughs up the surface, the ink will actually grab into those grooves. You can always add lines, but once you have made a line, you have to live with it. You can't fill it in. So that's another thing to think about. Making a little leg here. The lines that you put down are what's going to be dark, so it's really a positive in that way. Whatever is left plain is going to be wiped and it will remain the color of the paper. So I can treat it kind of like a pen and ink drawing where whatever I draw is going to hold the ink. So we're moving on to the next step. Once our plate is scratched and incised to our satisfaction, then the next step is to print it. And this is on a copper plate. It has been dry pointed, it's been burnished back, and it's also got some hard ground, which means that instead of directly scratching into the surface, a wax and asphaltum ground or covering has been put on it, and then the lines have been removed through the wax, not directly through the metal, but just through the wax. So it's a lot easier to get those types of kind of softer lines. And then the whole plate with the wax and everything is put into an acid bath. For copper, it's generally either a Dutch Morden, which is hydrochloric acid, but you can also use a ferric chloride, which is less toxic. And depending on how long you leave it in the acid and how many times you put it in, that's how deep the lines are. But they don't have to be that deep in order to hold the ink, and I'll show you that. One thing to note, because we're working on a plate that is thick and it has to go through the press, which is going to apply pressure, so we'll put our paper, printmaking paper, onto our image after it's been inked, and it has to go through the pressure in order for that ink to be transferred to the paper. So what we have to do before we put any ink on and send it through the press is actually bevel or knock down that edge. If you're working on a plate that's really small, like this one's really skinny, it's only like 1/16 of an inch, then you don't really have to do that because it's not that thick. But anything over that, I would say you have to knock that edge down to about a 45-degree angle. And that helps prevent the paper from getting cut by the sharp edges, the blankets that we're going to use on the press from getting cut on the sharp edges as well. Today I'm using a oil-based water-soluble ink, which is made by Charbonnel, and it's called Aqua Wash. There's a couple different companies that make a water-soluble oil-based ink. The nice thing about this type of ink is that it's oil-based, which means that it's really a dense color and you can create multiple prints without worrying about it drying in the plate, but you can wash it. So you can wash the plate and your tools with water before it has dried. And I like that a lot, especially when you're working with students. The next thing you need to use when you're getting ready to print is something to apply the ink with. So I've got my old library card that I'm going to be scraping the ink on the surface so that it really gets in the grooves. Because if you were to use something like a brayer, it would only get the surface. And what we really want with Intaglio is to get inside those grooves. So you need to use something that's gonna force it in there. A piece of cardboard works also. I have an ink knife for mixing up my ink. And then I also have what's called a tarlatan. And this is a starched piece of cheesecloth that obviously has been used before, but what we do is we bundle it up and we use it to wipe the excess ink off the surface. And because it's starched, it's kind of stiff, so it only grabs what's on the surface and it won't go inside those grooves and pull up any ink that we want to keep. So I'll show you how to do all those steps, and then when it's ready, then we will take our paper. This is just a little sample of a printmaking paper. We've got some soaking in a water tub, and as it soaks, the fibers kind of pull apart just a little bit. You won't notice it, but it will be, on a microscopic level. They'll pull apart and then they will get softer so that we can actually, under pressure, push them into the grooves and then pull the ink off. So I'll show you how to do all those steps, and then when it's ready, then we will take our paper. This is just a little sample of a printmaking paper. The best type of paper for Intaglio is something that can get damp, because you want, again, to get the paper into those grooves. And if you have a cotton rag paper like this Reeves BFK, it will expand when it gets dampened. So we've got some soaking in a water tub. And as it soaks, the fibers kind of pull apart just a little bit. You won't notice it, but it will be, on a microscopic level. They'll pull apart and then they will get softer so that we can actually, under pressure, push